So good to be back with you today. After the time of quarantine in the house of formation, COVID has now left that little place over there across the back alley and just across the courtyard. In total, 11 of our seminarians and none of our priests contracted COVID. We did take necessary precautions and have the men that did contract COVID isolate immediately after they first showed symptoms and beyond their testing. Newman University was a great friend during this time to us. They have a medical dorm over there, and the men stayed there or in their own homes. I'm grateful for Father Andrew. When you see him, if he's around this evening, say thank you to him. He carried a lot of the sacramental burden for me over the past few weeks. I thought maybe he'd show some signs of weakness, so I got the bishop to come last weekend or so. He never did. He's a strong young man. I'm also grateful to the office staff and volunteers and the school staff and leaders who helped us through the time while I was focused more on the house of formation. As you know, I sat on the front porch on those weekends, and one thing really occurred to me. We have a lot of great people. And my part in this parish isn't to make it good, it's already good. My part, perhaps, is in helping to give some direction and leadership to help us to be even better. So please pray for me as we continue to do this. My thought about the house wasn't quite the same. Last weekend I was preaching at 9:30 a.m. to the seminarians, and my first thing in my head that came out of my mouth is, I really need to talk to somebody outside of this house. They all laughed like you guys are laughing. I think they were thinking the same thing. Just before I left, I gave our Mass here a financial update on the parish and said, we finally been able to get our head above water to come out of operating debt, and maybe now we're ready to take the next step. It was the weekend that the speakers came down from the choir loft, and I looked kind of surprised as I looked up and thought, well, it's a good thing I'm talking about this that weekend. And so today I thought I'd reflect a little bit on the second reading from St. Paul to the Philippians, and maybe our first next step. And I hope that then I'm not gone for the next 5 weeks. One thing that I have been reflecting on in this time of quarantine is the division in the world. And honestly, one thing I'm so grateful for is that we can come to this little neighborhood parish, a refuge in the city of Wichita, and maybe a refuge from the world, and find people that St. Paul is talking about in today's second reading to the Philippians, where he says, "Complete my joy by being of the same mind, with the same love, united in heart, thinking one thing." If we can be anything to the division that is taking place on the outside, I think we can show the world as we leave here what a wonderful place we have. What a wonderful place to worship. And to those we encounter, we do have that place for the most part where we can look each other squarely in the eye and think or say to each other, "I love you. You remind me of Jesus." That's why I wanted to share a few stories today about what I believe we are ready for in our parish, and it is the beginning of a process of renewal. I mentioned this in a homily just before I started sitting on the porch, and since that time, well, a lot has happened. Story number 1. This summer, as I was meeting with all of our grade school families, Father Andrew and I took the opportunity to listen and to learn. And one of the things that I learned right away that we can already see is that our buildings have some deferred maintenance. They need some repair. And that is at the forefront of our mind, not just our grade school parents, but as I continued to listen to other families throughout the parish, probably about half of our active families or more right now, this is what seemed to be on the forefront of everybody's mind. How will we ever begin to do this? But while I was visiting with one of those families, there was a father he was baptized here. And when he was visiting with me, he now has some children in grade school. The father looked at me and he said, "Father, I'm going to be here long enough that I plan to be buried here. And I hope you're here long enough to bury me." I was kind of thinking vice versa, that I might go a little bit before him. Irregardless, he continued, "I want to be proud of what we have here. I'm already proud of the inside, but now it's time to be proud of the out. It's time to make the outside reflect and shine as much as the inside." As I was listening to him, I said, "I agree." He looked back at me and said, "So let's go." With quite a bit of force. Let's go. Today I want to think about the word go, and I think it can have new meaning for us as we change that thought in our mind from moving forward to thinking about giving opportunities. And today I'd like to invite you to participate in our first two Go projects: the parish hall roof and the renewal of our choir loft and new pipe organ that will come. Why these projects? Well, there are a few reasons. The choir loft was started before I came, and now it's time to finish it. But now for story number 2. When I was 7 years old, my mom walked home with my sister and I one day. We only lived a block from school in the small town of Weir, Kansas, and I was probably being a little knucklehead, pretty hyper like I always was. But my parents, they started to remodel our home, and where I started my life in Weir, Kansas, it was a double-wide trailer. We lived on Main Street. The banker had a cow pasture in our backyard. And most of the time when Mom came to get us at school, she'd open the front door for us, and I'd run to the back of the house where the kitchen was and the dining room, and I'd wave hello to the cows out the window. That day when we went home, I did what I normally did. I went to the kitchen to look out the window, and I was standing there 4 foot off of the ground, waving to Mr. and Mrs. Cow, but the whole back wall was missing because they had knocked it out to expand our home, and they hadn't draped it that evening. So Mama Bear came very quickly and put me under her arm, just kind of like this sideways, and she picked up my sister and did the same thing. She put us in the car and drove to her mother-in-law's house. Imagine, where we stayed for the next 2 or 3 weeks so that they could close that big hole and make our new home. Well, something similar happened while I was sitting out on the porch thinking about all of you, and while I was in quarantine. A few weeks ago when we had a good rain, you know that time where it just kind of got really cold here for a week? Something similar happened in our parish hall, and it's been happening now for quite some time. It was a hard rain, and our kiddos were having lunch over in the school cafeteria in our parish hall, and one of our little boys looked up and asked one of the adults, "Why is it raining inside?" I know that if you've been over there recently, you know the experience that our parish hall roof is now about 40 years old, and it's in need of great replacement. These two projects together, the new roof on the parish hall, it will cost us about $75,000, and the renovation or the updating of the choir loft and the installation of the pipe organ will cost about $25,000. A lot of those things will just help us to get the buildings repaired and the roof repaired and the things like the electricity up to code so that we can have these new beautiful things, so that it doesn't rain inside. That may sound like a lot, but there is some good news. While I was in quarantine, visiting with some of our parish and school groups and a couple of our parishioners, we've received pledges and gifts already of $40,000 between two parishioners, one parish group, and one school supporter. Two of the donations totaling $20,000 are matching grants, meaning that for every dollar that was given by those donors, additional dollars will be matched. Within the next 2 weeks, I'll be emailing, mailing, and or inserting in the bulletin a pledge form that will allow you to prayerfully consider a pledge to this first effort of renewal. I also want you to know, to give you the confidence, that this fall I'll be speaking to the parish pastoral and finance council about a plan to begin renewal of our campus, so that we can do this in a very thoughtful way, one step at a time as we can. We'll start with the outside of our buildings and work our way inside. These two projects, the hall roof and the organ, were either in need of repair or started before I arrived, and that's why we're looking at them as our first Giving Opportunity project. I want to thank you for your prayers and support during my time of quarantine. I'm so proud of each of you for all you do to make our parish so good. I promise to do my part to help to make us better. Part of that is looking after the buildings that we worship in and that we share our common life in. What will happen, I'm confident of, is that as we come together, as in the spirit of St. Paul's words today, we'll be able to show the community around us, which is experiencing its own renewal, all the love that is here. And the outside will reflect as much of the love that goes on the inside. This is one of a few reasons why I believe, as that parishioner shared with me, it's time to say, let's go. Let's allow the world to see the goodness that happens inside this place every day, as the world begins to see all of that from the outside. Let us stand and profess our faith.